Well, hello, Pythonistas and Honors Python 1. This was recorded in the fall of 2025. If you find that you're listening to it at a later date, it's no problem, still the same information. This is a breakdown from a quiz we took over for and while loops. So in EdUbe, if we're still using that later on, this will be module 3.2, for loops and while loops. Quick 5-question quiz, has a variety of questions on them. Some of them fill in the blank, some of them writing code. Let's take a look at the report from September 27th on these scores. You see the high score 100, low score 45, mean score 85. If you know me very well by now, I take a lot more stock in the median score, which is the middle score, as most of you know. And let's see if we can find that median score. Median score is 95. So if you're trying to figure out roughly where you stand, um, the best thing to look at is the median score and the high and the low scores, of course. But the median score right here, that means that half the class scored 95% or higher. Okay, so that's pretty huge. Down here you can see the distribution. Notice all the A's, and then we kind of have a general trailing off of grades as they go lower and lower. Now, this early in the semester, it's a little concerning to see this number of F's, D's, and C's. I'm not going to lie to you. Normally, what we see is more like 20 out of 30 people in the class that we have. We would normally see like 24 A's. So, just to give you an idea about that. All right, let's take a look at the quiz. Okay, so one of the first questions, yours may be mixed up a little bit because they're sometimes put in random order. Was simply to build a for loop that would print all the even numbers, I should say numbers, not number, from 2 to 100, including or inclusive 100. So inclusive of 200, sorry, inclusive of 2 and inclusive of 100. So both of those numbers should show up. Okay, so we're going to look at a couple of different ways to do that. Let me clear the output from this one. There are two ways. The first is we set up a for loop that brings I in, which is a local variable. That's going to bring I in starting with 1, all right, inclusive 1, and going up to 100, up through 100. So it's going to bring each of those numbers in. Now, they won't automatically print unless we tell them to. Now, to decide if something is an even number, we have to use the modulo operator. And any number mod 2, where the remainder is 0, that's going to be an even number, okay? Any number mod 2, where the remainder is 1, is going to be an odd number. Hopefully I said even number here. So this yields even, this gives you even numbers. Any number mod 2, modulo division 2, that equals 0 is even. That means there's no remainder. So it's got to be an even number. All right. And if that's true, then we just want to print it. Okay. So we'll run this cell and give it a second to go. And you can see that in fact, we did not want to print 1, even though we could have started with it, but we didn't print it because it's odd. So 1 mod 2 is going to have a remainder of 1, which is not 0, so it's not going to print it. It's just going to go to the next generated number in the range, which is 2, which equals 0, and then it follows that pattern all the way down to 100, and it will stop at 100 and not go into 101. All right, so that is the first way. Let's look at the second way. The second way is using a for loop. Up here, we actually have another argument that we could have put in. This is actually the same thing as this. Here's your starting number, which is inclusive, your ending number, which is exclusive, and then this is the step. How much do you want to increment by or decrement, go backwards by? By default, because it's so common to increment by 1, Python just allows you to use that notation and it will put 1 in automatically. But let's look at it down here where we change the step. Instead of having to mess with doing modulo division, we can generate numbers the same way again, except this time we want to start with 2. We don't want to start with 1. All right, we could have started with 2 before, that would have been fine. But we want to start with 2. We want to go through 100. We don't want to print 101. But we're going to step by 2s. All right, so that means it's going to print 2, and then it's going to step 2 more, which will be 4, and step 2 more, which will be 6, and so on until it gets to right up to 101. So if we run that, you should be able to see all those numbers. Okay, so 2 ways to answer that question, both pretty efficient. I would make sure that you know how to do both. They're both super handy in different situations. I would definitely understand and know the modulo division operator and how that works, because it comes up in quite a few situations, not just with odd and even numbers. All right, the next question that we want to take a look at also has to do with the for loop, and the for loop with a range function, looking at a start of 2, a stop of 12. Remember that 12 is exclusive, it will not print, and then a step of 3. And so it wanted you to list a set of numbers that the following range function represents, and it gave you 4 boxes. So you should know that there are 4 numbers that are going to be produced, and they are 2, 5, and 11. But let's take a look at it in the code. All right, so for I in range, again, 2 start, 12 stop. So we're going to include 2. 12 is not going to be included, it is exclusive. And then 3 is what we're going to step by. So print I for all of those. So we're going to print 2, and then we're going to step by 3. Last time I checked, 2 plus 3 is 5. And then we're going to bring 5 back in, and then we're going to add 3 again by the step, which is going to give you 8, and then 3 again by 11. And then it hits 12, and it knows it can include 12, and so it stops. And so that's how you solve that one. The next 2 questions are very straightforward. What keyword starts the next iteration of your loop when it is executed? If for some reason you have a conditional inside of a loop or something like that, and you need the loop to continue going despite meeting a certain condition, you can just type in keyword continue, and it will keep going. Same thing if you need to stop your loop down here, number 4. You can say what keyword exists when your loop is executed. You can use break, and this is used a lot in while loop. So let's just take a look at a quick example of one of those. All right, so let's take a look at the simple break statement. A lot of you like to use while true loops, and they are handy. There's no doubt about that. I generally like to put a condition up here. Uh, while loops run as long as a condition is true. So what's the danger here? The danger is if you have just a while true loop like this with no condition, like is x greater than 5. The danger is that you have some condition sitting down here maybe that will not break your loop, and you'll have an infinite loop, and then you'll eat up compute time and be frustrated and have to restart things and stuff. But we're going to use one here since a lot of you use them and it's a good way to see things. Let's just talk about what happens here. So we start the loop. The very first thing that happens is we have some user input, and we ask the user to enter a command, P or Q. P is for print, Q is for quit, and then we put some conditionals in. If the user input is Q, then we're going to print goodbye and then break. And then as soon as that break hits, the loop stops, and the elif and the else do not run. Okay. If P is entered, obviously user in equals Q, P is not equal to Q. So it's going to skip down to the elif, or the else if statement in other languages. P does equal P. So it's going to print, here's a line for you. And then it's going to skip the else statement, and it's going to come back up, and it's going to say, hey, is this while loop still true? And it's going to be yes. That's going to ask you for user input again, and you're going to start it over and over again. If you enter input other than P or Q, just to make sure that we capture and don't mess up the loop, and that we capture other input, we're going to say, hey, not sure what you did here, enter P or Q. All right, so let's run this real quick and check it out. All right, so we immediately get asked. I'm going to put in, I'm going to go ahead and put in P. All right, here's a line for you. Then it's going to loop and ask again. I'm going to put in T. Not sure what you entered here. Enter P or Q or be gone with you. I'm going to enter P. I want to print another line. And then finally, I'm just going to enter Q to break the loop. And you can see that it breaks the loop, prints goodbye before it breaks. Remember, you got, if you break the loop up here in line 6 and then put goodbye beneath it, it's not going to print the goodbye. It's going to break the loop, and that's going to be it. All right, so there is a simple use of the break statement. All right, just to make sure that we also cover continue, and you can see a use case for that. We're going to create a for loop here that gives you a range of 0 to 10. Remember, if you just put range 10 in, that's the same thing as this. Python just lets you make it a lot simpler, okay? But range 10 means 0 inclusive of 0 and exclusive of 10. What this does is going to say, hey, if I mod 2 is not equal to 0, okay? If I mod 2 is equal to 0, then we know that means odd. If I mod 2 is not equal to 0, it's going to be 1, and it's going to say, hey, skip the rest of the loop body, all right? And we'll see what happens here. So we would expect this. I mean, right now, just take a moment and think about what, pause the video and think what you would, what this would probably print. Okay, hopefully you paused it. Let's take a look. And it prints all even numbers, because if it's odd, it's just telling the loop to continue. It's going to skip the print statement, and it's going to go back up here. So when 0 comes in, the remainder is I mod 2 0 not equal to 0 is going to be 0, and then the rest of these are 0, so they're not equal to 0, which makes it true. So you get 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. And continue allows only those numbers to be printed. You could use this, a structure like this. It's a little different to do the earlier question where you had to print odd or even numbers. All right, and then let's look at the last question. This is where you're going to use a while loop, and you're going to repeatedly ask a user a trivia question until they enter the correct answer. Now, the trick here is a lot of you did that portion, but you failed to do the second portion, which is after the user has entered the correct answer, print out how many tries it took them to answer correctly. So that led to some issues with people not setting up counter variables. So let's see what that looks like. All right, so here's one example where we're dealing primarily with text, which is important to note because we're going to be asking for user input. And as we all know, that user input comes in as a string and no other type. We'll look at one with integer here in just a second. So I just made up a question here, little trivia question. Is the continent of Australia wider than the moon? The answer is yes, it is wider than the moon. So ask answer is that variable. We gather that input, comes in as a string. We're going to set answer equal to yes, all right? And then we're going to set a count variable, and we're going to start it at 1. Okay, why 1, you ask? Well, we start this while loop, and it says ask, like while ask answer is not equal to answer, all right? We're going to see if they're the same. If they're not equal, then ask, okay? Well, if they're not equal, then, you know, hey, here we go. So, but let's say that they are equal. This whole loop never runs, but you did take a guess. So if you got it right off the bat and it skips lines 5, 6, and 7, or it skips lines 6 and 7, then when you do the print statement, it has to tell you that it took 1 try. And remember that count is an int, so we have to cast it back to a string so that we can concatenate it with all of this good stuff. Okay, so just remember, if this loop is going to run while the user answer or the ask answer and the actual answer are not equal, all right, so we set the counter to 1 because they have made a guess up here. All right, so we asked for 1. If we skip the loop, we're not going to increment the counter and it'll print out the right answer. Now, let's say that they say no, all right? Well then, yeah, they're not equal, all right? Count's already set to 1. It's going to ask them again, all right? And when it asks them again, it's also going to increment the counter by 1. And then it's going to come up here and check again, All right, and whether if they get it wrong again, it's going to ask them again and increment the counter by 2. Or sorry, by 1 from 2 to 3. So let's take a look at how this works. Is it wider than the moon? I'm going to say how. Okay, obviously that's not right. I'm going to say 25. I don't know why. That's not right. Is it wider than the moon? We're going to say no. That's not right. And then I'm going to put in yes. All right, and it says correct. It took you 4 guesses. So that's a nice, quick little program for that. Just remember, if you're doing a number guessing game, all right, where you're doing a math problem or something, and this input is going to be an integer where you're going to be comparing it to a number or even a float, you're going to have to cast like this. Not for this question because we're not asking for a number, but if you had one, you would have to cast like that.